Good afternoon. I'm Scott Robinson, clinical professor and director of the REIT Center at NYU, and it's my great honor to welcome you to our Leading Through a Storm panel discussion. I'm excited to speak with these 5 successful and seasoned CEOs from various property sectors and to hear about the lessons they've learned from the pandemic over the past 13 months. They'll also share their insights about how they've positioned their companies for success as we emerge into the post-virus economy. So before we get into all that, why don't we get started with some introductions and backgrounds? Joe, should we start with you?
Sure. Joe CORADINO, CEO of Pennsylvania Real Estate Investment Trust. I'm all company. In terms of background, I grew up in the streets of South Philadelphia, and I'm the first person in my family to graduate college. Actually, when I went to graduate school, my mother's sister asked her if I did bad in college, and they kept me back to graduate school. So I'm a pretty fortunate guy to be where I am today, and I'm honored to be on this panel with all of you.
Thank you. That's great. Jeff.
Thanks a lot. Jeff Fisher, I'm CEO of Chatham Lodging Trust. We are a hotel REIT and the only hotel REIT that specializes in the upscale extended stay hotel segment, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about because they have been, better performing asset class within hotels during COVID. Started out as a lawyer, represented some folks that were building some of the original Hampton Inns in the country, and today there's well over 3,000 of those. We built one of the first ones actually back in the mid 80s. Anyway, had another public company prior to this that we started as a hotel REIT in '94 and sold in 2007. Let's call that very good luck. So that's kind of my story for the moment. Thanks for having us.
It's great. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. Marguerite.
Sure. I'm Marguerite Nader, Chief Executive Officer of Equity Lifestyle Properties. I've been with ELS for almost 30 years, started out as an analyst, wanted to start out work the day after graduation. I thought I absolutely needed to do that. I didn't think I was going to be in the same building for 30 years. I probably could have taken a little bit more time, but went from an analyst to acquisitions to CFO, and I've been the CEO for the last 9 years. And ELS operates high quality resorts across the country. We own 400 properties. We have 4,000 employees, and we operate little towns and cities across the United States.
That's a good way of putting it. Appreciate that. Paul.
I am the CEO of CoreSite Realty Corporation. We are a data center, REIT. We specialize in data center campuses that are very network and cloud dense in 8 major metro markets. So really an essential service for all the digital operations that help keep the company going, especially in times of like the pandemic. I grew up as a military brat. I was a lawyer for a while. I joined the real estate world in '91 with the Security Capital Organization, where I had the pleasure of meeting and working with HAP for a while. Spent several years in North Carolina doing master plan communities, including new urbanism. And I've been CEO here for almost 5 years.
Great.
CoreSite has about 500 employees, a little less than 500 employees, most of them at the data center level to maintain the operations and uptime of our data center communities.
It's great. Thank you. Save the best for last, somebody who probably needs no introduction. Hap.
Thank you, Scott. I'm Hap Stein, and in January 1 of last year of 2020, I graduated from being Chief Executive Officer to being Executive Chairman. I've been with Regency for, I guess this is my 46th year. That's the reason why you get no introduction. Interestingly enough, I was a European history major at Washington Lee University, then went to business school at Dartmouth. Interesting change from that standpoint. I saw Paul in his midlife as an attorney, and I've been, as I said, with Regency for over 45 years. Regency owns and operates over 400 community neighborhood shopping centers throughout the country. and primarily grocery anchored. And we like to think that we are the leading national owner, operator, and developer of those shopping centers. And that's what Paul Zurek told me to say.
You're doing
I'm
great, Hap.
Thank you, sir.
I'm sure many of my students would appreciate to hear that that you had a history degree woven in there. So that's great. Look, the title of this panel is Leading Through a Storm. A lot of the conversation today is going to be around, or the conference over the next 2 days is going to be around, how companies manage their business through COVID and how they're positioned to come out of it. But I think we have a unique collection of CEOs here. These different property types, each of you are coming into COVID from different positions. I think you're coming out of it in different positions. So what I would like to do is spend a little bit of time. Let's go back to late 2019. There was a lot of talking heads who were thinking there was going to be a recession. Some thought there wasn't going to be a recession. You guys are all cycle tested. You've been through downturns. What were you thinking before COVID? How were you positioning your business? And then we can get into a conversation about how that positioning and prior experience helped you kind of lead into the storm, if you will. Joe, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. I guess to a certain extent, I would change the title as it relates to the mall business with leading through a tsunami from a storm. When we were, as we were working our way through 19, we felt quite good about where the business was headed, primarily driven by the fact that we had replaced a number of department stores, be it Sears, Penny's, Macy's, with the likes of Burlington and Dick's Sporting Goods, et cetera, et cetera. And they were just beginning to come online. In fact, we opened about 4 new anchor replacements in March of 20, in early March of 20. And so our view of the balance in 19 and 20 was a very positive one. We were looking to obviously be in a position to grow earnings and to reap the benefits of having created a quality portfolio. Unfortunately, when you think about the mall sector, while I know all my peers on this call are in the real estate business, I think the mall business was almost likened more to a cruise ship business or an airline business. We were treated, somewhat uniquely, I'll be kind, in terms of being able to reopen. We shut down our entire portfolio for over 4 months. And, that really caused us to really struggle to get through. We went from 100% collections in March to 19% in April and May. So we got hit pretty hard in terms of it. And the result was, as a result of, one fund buying 5% of our debt forced us into a restructuring the end of October. The good news is, and there is a bright light, the good news is that right now, as a matter of fact, as of today, we've collected about 90% of our billed rent. And if we look at it on a cash basis, deferred rents, et cetera, that number is over 125%. So recovery is on the way. In properties where, there's a prevalence of vaccines being distributed, military markets being that example, our traffic is over 120% of pre-COVID traffic. So there is a bright light out there. We're seeing retailers with open to buys and alternative uses are falling out of the sky. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
You mentioned that your traffic is higher than pre-COVID levels. Is that because some of the anchor repositioning you've been going through? What's driving that?
Anchor repositioning, but I think it's also, someone likened the environment we're about to enter to the roaring 20s after the Spanish flu. And I think there's a lot of pent up demand for dining, entertainment, shopping. And in markets where you have, I have a mall in a market with 7 military bases, right? And so everybody's vaccinated and people are just out and about. So I think it's a combination of, new anchors, new dining, new entertainment, and vaccines.
Got it. Yep. Thanks. Jeff, the hotel business, I think, had been booming. Earnings has started to turn flat a little bit across the sector. What were your views in 2019 and how are you positioning yourself, pre-COVID? How'd that help you out going into COVID?
Yeah, for 2019, I think similar to Joe, we felt pretty good about the economy. We saw the companies that our hotels were doing business with were doing plenty of business and lots of travel. But as you say, we were really in the hotel business at the very tail end of a long upcycle. And our business is very cyclical. As we did our IPO for Chatham to take advantage of what we thought was going to be a great upcycle after the Great Recession in 2010, we did this IPO and we're able to make a lot of acquisitions. But RevPAR went flat, and it went flat because of all the new supply, primarily in the hotel business, really even back in the prior year and in a lot of markets starting in 2017. So we were positioned well insofar as we had ramped up our expense controls because labor was very difficult. Wages were going up, and we have a lot of hotels in Silicon Valley where you really can't find, housekeepers and folks to work very easily, and hotels in similar northeastern markets with the same dynamics. So we pulled our belt in, really at the end of 18, and we're kind of riding a 2019 wave of no revenue growth. How do we keep our margins, where they need to be? And then along came COVID. So really, it was more of the same. It was total margin focus, and we really spun on a dime. We very quickly determined, because our hotels are limited service hotels, extended stay hotels at that, we didn't need to close any. So unlike most of our brethren, and particularly those in the full service hotel business, where by the middle of April, end of April, all their hotels were closed, we looked at our break-even analysis and saw that we could pare the hotel down to a general manager, keep our sales director if the hotel had one, and let both of those people really work the front desk and make the front desk their office for the very few people that were coming in the door, in April, May, et cetera. And so staffing was next to non-existent, and we reduced our head count at the hotels by some 60%. We had 1,800 hotel employees, and we had reduced that by the fall down to 700 or 800. So, and somewhat similar cuts, not quite as draconian at the corporate level. We pivoted pretty fast, and I think that worked for us.
That's great. There's a lot there I want to dig into as we come out of COVID, but I'll save it for a little bit later in the conversation. Marguerite, you're in somewhat of a counter-cyclical, or has historically been thought of as a counter-cyclical business. I think everybody's, the investment market's thinking about affordable housing is kind of changing their opinion of manufactured housing going forward. But where was your thinking in 29 before we kind of went into COVID?
As we looked at, getting ready for 2020, we were really pleased with the high demand that we saw both in our RV portion of our business and the manufactured housing portion. Just really strong reservations, really strong desire for the baby boomers to get out of the cold. It's a good season for us when it's really cold up north, because the phones start ringing. Nobody wants to be, even pre-COVID, nobody wanted to be in New York and Chicago in December, January, February. It didn't make sense, and now it certainly doesn't make sense. But so we saw really heightened demand. We had a really good first quarter. And then COVID hit, and we were still feeling really good. But then we started to see governmental, shutdowns of RV parks. So we had to not open some RV parks. We had to close some. So we had a tough couple of months in the RV business. But then it came roaring back as we were able to operate. And on the MH business, really strong collections. I mean, we were 98% kind of throughout the whole time. And that's really because we really appeal to that baby boomer demographic, the senior who's retired. And, in terms of a financial impact, this didn't have that large of a financial impact for them. So that was really what we focused on. We focused, of course, on the health and safety of our employees and our customers. And, we have 4,000 employees, and 90% of them have been working every day in the field since COVID hit. So really a focus on making certain that they were in a good place and that our customers were in a good place.
Yep. Paul, you're in a little bit of a different position. We've been rapidly growing into Industry 4.0 over the past few years. We can talk about what life looks like for you in 21, 22, whether or not we pulled business forward. But leading into COVID, I think your business was probably a little bit more stable, less focused on a recession. But what was your thinking?
You're exactly right. The secular demand drivers for data center capacity were really strong. We weren't that fearful of a recession. In fact, our biggest challenge was replenishing our supply because of rapid lease up since 2016. And so we had a lot more construction coming online. And as COVID hit, it illustrated even more the importance for companies to modernize their digital infrastructure so that they could operate better and interface with customers digitally much more effectively than they have in the past, and now support employees working from home. So even more demand drivers coming out of COVID. So from that perspective, we were in pretty good shape. We just had to make sure we stayed ahead of our financing and our capital needs, and our team did a good job of hitting the bond markets when rates came back down. And frankly, normally we're pretty agnostic about interest rates and try to keep a 50-50 or within a 60-40 split of fixed and floating. Rates dropped so low that we fixed about 90% plus of our interest rates, which was a positive. Our biggest challenges because of COVID were the rapid switch to working from home for the professional employees, how to maintain safety for our data center operations personnel who had to be in the data centers. And they're multi-tenant data centers. We've got hundreds of tenants in each of these campuses. They interoperate with each other extensively. I mean, they just couldn't go down. So we had to make sure we could keep them safe, and more than just safe, limit the number of days we would lose due to quarantining because of all these regulations that came in, and frankly keep them supported. Because suddenly you have a two-tier employee class. You got some people that have to go to work every day, and others that don't. And what do you do about that? So those were the big challenges for us. And finally, the other thing we had to change very quickly was how we sell, because a lot of selling takes place at conferences, trade shows, events, seminars. All of that got shut down, and we had to pivot rapidly to virtual activities. In hindsight, we learned a lot from this experience. I think it's made us a much more agile corporation. We made some big moves very quickly and learned how to do them the right way. Didn't do everything perfectly, obviously, but I think we've been able to come out of it, and will come out of it when it's fully behind us, much stronger, with a greater appetite for more agile change.
Interesting. Thanks. Hap, the open air retail center business has definitely fared differently than the rest of retail. And Regency has always maintained a pretty stable balance sheet. But going into COVID, was there anything kind of on your mind that you were thinking about preparing for in a downturn or economic recession?
Not very good at predicting economic cycles, not very good at predicting pandemics, but I do think kind of to provide a little background and color, it would be to say, since the company was founded over 60 years ago, we've been on this journey from good to great, always learning and getting better. Sometimes you're taking a couple steps forward, sometimes you're taking a step or two back. And that's occurred when the company was founded, when we went public almost 30 years ago, when Security Capital with Paul made their investment. Gosh, that was over 20 years ago when that occurred. And then kind of the next, after that, and we've always kind of focused on several pillars, a strong balance sheet, quality portfolio, a value add asset management and development capabilities, and an engaged team supported by, and guided by a very special culture. And that's always guided us, but those things have always gotten better and stronger as we moved along. And I want to say that to go back to the Great Recession, because you always think you're in pretty good shape, but the Great Recession said, not so fast, you're not so good. And we use that to right size our development program, to further strengthen our balance sheet. I think we made some moves from the people standpoint that that made a lot of sense. We sold a bunch of properties to further enhance the quality of the portfolio. And then, the business, as Joe can tell you, e-commerce, retail business has always been exceptionally competitive, but competition in the business, e-commerce, which is accelerating the disruption in the business, further hone these things. So I think that we went into the pandemic about as well as we possibly could have been. You always can be better prepared, et cetera. But our payout ratio was low. The balance sheet was in great shape. We were able to continue to pay our dividend and fully cover our dividend. One of the few in our sector that were able to do that. That was critically important. The quality of our properties has allowed us to, I think we've been for the last quarter, well over 90% collections, which is, if you'd have told me this back in, a year ago, I would have said, where do I sign from that standpoint? The tension on the culture, and it was been really, really tough, working from home, people worried about safety, et cetera, et cetera. And it stressed our culture, and I'm sure the culture of, the other four executives here. And that's been, a challenge for our team. But it has been extremely gratifying to watch Lisa Palmer, who succeeded me as CEO of Regency, and the executive team work our way through this from taking advantage of opportunities to further strengthen the balance sheet, keeping the team together, focused on doing extraordinary work when people are worried about the health of their families. So I think we're going to come out of this downturn better positioned for the future than we were going in. But I am looking forward to getting back to 100% collections.
I think we're all looking forward to getting back to 100% period, right?
Absolutely, Scott.
I want to come back to everybody and talk about the concept of culture and leadership and how you dealt with that with what rapidly became a distributed employee network. But as we kind of segue, Hap, you touched on a point about the financial crisis. You acted pretty decisively, Regency acted decisively by advancing a drawdown on the credit facility, to stockpile some cash early on. I think all of you made appropriate, fast, swift action, really kind of probably from your education going through other cycles. But were there things that you experienced that maybe you would have done differently? Not necessarily better, but just differently in hindsight? I think we've all kind of come out of this probably a little bit better than we had anticipated. There's a lot of uncertainty in March and April, but what types of lessons did you learn coming, through this? Maybe Hap will.
Well, one of the more difficult decisions when we were at 60% collections was to maintain the dividend. And you sit there and you say, is there an opportunity? Should we have been more conservative? And we made the decision that we were in a position from a cash standpoint, from a balance sheet standpoint, to wait and see, and hopefully things get better. And that would, in hindsight, was a good decision. The decision to draw down on a credit line, I'm not sure we would have done anything differently than what we did, the amount that we did. In hindsight, you would have said we didn't need to do that because of the negative arbitrage that was involved. But I'm glad we did that. We were able to, we fully paid those draws down. We took advantage of the low interest rates and refinanced a significant amount of debt, including a bunch of our term debt. And the balance sheet is now in better shape than it was when we went into the downturn. So, if this thing had not, let me say this, if those great scientists and medical workers, hadn't, found the vaccines like we had, and we weren't in a position to do that, and maybe if those of us hadn't taken as many health deals about wearing masks and socially distancing, we wouldn't be in the position that we are today. But fortunately, our country is in the position we are today, and our company is also.
Yep, thanks. Jeff, like Joe, your customer base literally went away overnight. Any lessons learned from managing through that situation? I know you've acted very quickly and decisively as well, but in retrospect, any other lessons that you learned kind of looking forward to the next situation?
Oh, we're certainly not looking forward to a pandemic, right? We're looking forward to seeing folks get back in airplanes again. Our business traveler is gone, and the industry has been talking about that, and the analysts have been talking about that. We're talking to our customers through our sales force, and primarily it's a nationwide sales force on the operating level. And, in some cases, we're hearing, about a little bit of travel starting this summer and a little bit more starting after Labor Day. I think we're going to have to hold on as an industry until then. Of course, the leisure, and as it's now called, leisure, right? The blended business and leisure trip is really what we're adapting to, and we're looking at that operationally and saying, what does that customer need, and what don't they need, and that affects the kind of services and therefore the expense levels that we can run our hotels at. So looking back, I'm not answering your question exactly. I'm very pleased with how our operating team responded here. We're unique. We're a hotel REIT. Hotel REITs can't run their own hotels, as by the Internal Revenue Code. But we have an affiliated management company that runs all of our hotels, that's housed right here in these offices. We saw that the need for collaboration, at least in our business, was really important. And, obviously in March last year, nobody was coming in the office, but very quickly, within a couple of weeks, our executive team between both companies on their own started coming in and worked together to quickly figure out how we can run these hotels and stay afloat. The balance sheet management, was similar to, I think, what everybody else did. We got lucky. We were able to sell a hotel to the San Diego Housing Commission, essentially to house homeless people at kind of a record price. So, there's a few of more of those transactions perhaps coming down the road for others, particularly in California, where the homeless issue is huge. But I don't think we need to talk about that right now. Anyway, so I think, we've learned that quick response and fast action, especially in a business where you're renting rooms, by the night, is really important.
Yeah, Joe?
Well, I'd often heard throughout my career that, the important thing isn't the real estate, it's the people, right? And that really came home in spades once the pandemic hit. On a number of levels, obviously, people began to be concerned about their safety, their lives. I mean, to a certain extent, most of the experience I drew on during this time came from the streets of South Philly and the military, as opposed to college and graduate school. We really wanted to make sure our people felt safe. We kept, while our properties were closed, we kept the property teams in place because immediately we began to focus on using stores in our malls to the extent retailers were interested as fulfillment centers. We began to institute curbside service, and we began to do outdoor events, including drive-in movies and food truck events, and anything to really do two things. One, continue to keep the properties alive and vibrant on the one hand. On the other hand, drive traffic and create some level of revenue in an environment, again, where collections were closer to 20%. And one thing we're pretty proud of is, as a result of our efforts, we ended up writing the protocol for the state of New Jersey and the state of Pennsylvania for reopening retail. And we're very focused on creating something that A, maximize safety, but B, was workable. And so as we went through this process, the people, we needed to engage them. So we created a reopening committee so we could think about what we were going to do when we reopened and how we needed to do things differently, because it wasn't going to be, same old. And we created, obviously, a collections team. And the pivot was dramatic, where people were doing things completely different than what they were doing in their job prior to the pandemic. And I think what it's done, right, a good takeaway, is people have learned more about the business. When I used to think about the best candidate that you could hire, I would always ask the question, do they understand the business? It sounds kind of a naive question, but also a critical one. So I think our people have gotten better over time. And again, as we sit here today, I feel pretty good about, what's in front of us.
Well, that's a great point. Our students are coming into the industry. They don't have a lot of experience per se. And so they're really good at thinking differently. They're really focused on looking at how space maybe could be reused, repurposed. You've done a lot of work repositioning a number of your anchor spaces. You're looking, you brought in self-storage, you brought in an Aldi's, you brought in a new family entertainment center. You're looking to do multifamily. Is there kind of a theme or a thesis there, or is this more of a granular kind of repositioning analysis?
I think the box of tenants that we typically, were thinking about is blown wide open. We signed an agreement about 2 weeks ago with Cooper Hospital to move the MD Anderson Cancer Center to the Sears building at Morristown Mall. Now, this isn't a little operation. It's 200,000 square feet of outpatient cancer care facilities. We would have never even thought about a deal like that. I was reading a report a couple of months ago and found out that Philadelphia is one of the top life sciences markets in the country, right? So we're in the middle of taking a Sears building at one of our properties and converting it to a life sciences building. We're actually looking at taking a significant amount of inline mall space and repurposing it as life sciences. So again, the the box that we looked in is just, completely different today than it was pre-COVID, maybe even before that. This started before that for sure. But I think, necessity, they say, is the mother of invention. And, we needed to find other uses. Of course, the HAPS comment, I mean, certainly internet sales have gotten a lot stronger of late. And we've seen, a lot of retailers who, kind of reached their useful life. To be kind,
Joe.
What?
You're being kind when you say the way you phrase that.
I tried to. I tried to. It's unlike me, but I tried to. And so now we're saying, who can go in this space? And I could see ourselves in a few years with over a third of our tenants being non-retail tenants.
There's a certain full cycle elegance to that, right? Because the shopping center started off as a community center, and you're repositioning some of the anchor space to still be a community focal point. Marguerite, if I take that concept of community, MH has not really been forward-looking on tech per se historically, but I think you moved pretty quickly to leverage tech to really have a sense of community amongst your members, whether it was through Thousand Trails or in integrating for leasing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we've spent a lot of time over the last few years trying to figure out how do we get our experience closer to our customers. So our customers are up in the north. It's the winter, and we want them to experience Florida, Arizona, California. And we were struggling with it. How do we make it so that people appreciate what we have to offer? We spent a lot of time on our websites, a lot of time on video tours, et cetera. And it was really in COVID times that what we saw was people were really willing to buy sight unseen. I mean, not physically being there. We did a lot of FaceTiming, and it was directed FaceTime, which is really interesting, where people were really willing to say, okay, walk me through the house, show me outside, let's walk down to the community center. And they were really open to transacting in that way. So that's been very helpful for us. We also, during COVID, we implemented what many of the hotels have done, a touchless check-in experience on the RV side. And we've been trying to do that for a while, but it was okay, guys, let's figure this out. And the team got together and did an amazing job of saying, okay, this is what we have to do. These are the steps we have to take. And within 4 weeks, we had a touchless experience so that people didn't have to go into the office to check in. You were able to check in and then go to your site and do what everyone wanted to do, which is go out and experience the outdoors and be in a safe environment. So we've spent a lot of time focused on that, and also from the employee side, a paperless experience so that we don't have to, handle all the paperwork that we had historically handled.
I'm sure Paul loves to hear your use of more data.
more and more. Keep it
exactly. Exactly.
Paul, I have some students who are doing research on 5G and edge computing, which obviously begs the question about the evolution of data and data storage. What are your thoughts, and what are you guys doing looking forward about edge computing and 5G technology?
Let me go back to just what I said earlier. We continue to expand our campuses because all of the data associated with these increasing use cases in most major metros, they need to come back to a central place for various types of processing. And the lower the latency in the market, the better it is. And so that's why all the companies on our campuses interoperate with other companies that provide different parts of their digital infrastructure stack. Marguerite and doesn't want, and Joe, and Jeff, don't want their touchless systems to take a long time and hurt the customer experience. So related to just keeping our campus capacity adequate to accommodate these growing needs, we continue to work with customers and other solution providers to provide the right internal network and connectivity infrastructure to just make it easier and easier for companies to operate with each other and to transfer data with each other. And, frankly, to be able to turn it up and turn it down on a moment's notice and make it very agile. So keeping ahead of the need for different connectivity products is crucial. And again, the other side of it is keeping all these data centers up and running so they don't go down. And that includes the interconnection piece of it. Let me go back to something that Hap said that was really important for us coming into this. If we had not been intentional about building our culture, we would not have done as well through the pandemic. We've got 8 guiding principles. I won't go into all of them. The 2 pillars, though, are commitment to the customer and commitment to each other. And we've used those over the years to guide training, events, and especially investment in our infrastructure so that we can deliver what our customers need. We maintain the highest uptime in the industry. I mean, through COVID and everything that went on, and even some people having to work overtime because of just COVID type quarantining for others. Our uptime was like 99.999996%. 20 of our 22 data centers had no downtime at all. And you just can't achieve that if you're not prepared going into a crisis. But then once you're into the crisis, as I mentioned earlier, it accelerated some other ways of thinking that were really related to how you have to operate in the digital world anyway. We had increased workloads in a lot of areas, regulations, safety, restrictions, how to staff properly, all this extra care and support of your employee base, which was going through a lot of different stresses. And we could have done better in probably all of those areas in hindsight, but I'm pretty proud of what the team did. But they couldn't have done it if we weren't very quick to say, you know what, these things that we thought were kind of sacred cows, these legacy activities, we can't have people keep doing some of this stuff and do this other additional work without getting burned out. So we had to become more agile at how we change things and more agile about deploying, new products and support activities. And that really gets to the key of providing digital infrastructure is your customers, the better customers. And you've got a real bifurcation in American business. You have those who have been very quick to adopt these hybrid and multi-cloud architectures that enable them to change the way they digitally operate and work with their customers very rapidly. I mean, McKinsey is constantly going on about the advantages of this type of activity and other consultants versus others that are still kind of like they're not sure they want to go in that direction. And they've been slower to move that way. And some of them, because of all the things we've talked about, had to slow down. But more and more of our customers are becoming fast moving, making bigger changes. As they change more, they need, different kinds of support from us. So it's just, our customer base is a digital customer base. They're agile. We have to be agile. And the pandemic, as I said earlier, helped us to, really forced us to do that in spades. In hindsight, there were a couple of areas that we could have done better. One thing we learned is that in a new situation, you just have to keep over communicating. Some of the others have mentioned COVID fatigue and things like that. We had good policies and procedures at the data center level, but you had to keep reinforcing them or you would see some deviation. Likewise, and this will continue going forward. There will be continued work from home. I think that's not going away. We've got to figure out how to be more conscious and effective at some kind of hybrid model that gets people together more frequently and restores social connections and collaboration. And we also need to look differently at the way we support employees who may be struggling and did struggle in the pandemic with all these additional burdens on their life, including the need to have the discipline to shut off their work and not work all day just because they're working from home. So all of those are examples of how important it was to stay on top of what was happening, to constantly look for areas where you're falling short, and to make agile changes to fix things and to improve and to add more value.
Right. I think your reference to us doing some sort of work from home permanently reminds me of what I've been saying. I think we all need to adopt to some sort of omni-channel approach that the retails and Joe's been dealing with and HAP's been dealing with the past few years, right? Look, I inadvertently prepared about an hour's worth of questions for each of you. I was really excited to have this conversation, but we're about out of time. We've got 5 more minutes. What I'd like to do is spend a few minutes here probing for guidance and insight and words of wisdom for our students as they wind up their master's degree and start looking to build their career in this post-virus economy. I'll just open up the floor for where the market's going and how they should position themselves, and any words of wisdom.
I think now's a great time to get up to speed on an asset class that sounds interesting, and then really pursue the best company that's in that industry. And I think it's really important to understand that and now you can appreciate what's happened to that particular industry during COVID and what is going to happen in the future, and really become very conversant and follow an industry, and then get it down to a specific company, and then call the CEO. That's what I would do.
I mean, you've really done that, right? You spent your entire career at Equity, so.
I did. And I think once you're in, I mean, just finding, once you actually make it in and make it into an organization, I think finding a mentor is unbelievably important, and it's been crucial to my success. And finding the right mentor, which is finding someone who's already mentored people before, and they have a lot of successful people that they've kind of sent along throughout the company.
Yeah, my advice would be find a company where you believe in the culture, it has a good business model, find a mentor there. But any of these companies can be extremely interesting. Even the boring, so to speak, retail industry. What's interesting about our business is we're a distribution channel for numerous retailers that all have different, from grocery stores to TJX to restaurants, to other purposes. But any of these 5 companies, whether it's the hotel business, the mall business, the business that Marguerite's in, Paul SZUREK, I mean, these are wonderful people, and if you get in with wonderful cultures, and if you get in any company that have similar type cultures that are well positioned like that, I think that's a key ingredient for your future.
I would add to that, and I agree with all of that. I would say, as someone starting out in the business, they should do everything they can to start out as a generalist, because frequently what happens in this business is you get hired as a leasing person or a finance person or a management person, and I'll go back to what I said earlier, and you don't really understand the business. And to a certain extent, that may mean that a smaller company is better than a bigger company in terms of someone stepping in to the real estate business. The more they can learn, the more exposure they could get to the entire, from, call it land acquisition to property operations, the better value they'll create for themselves in their career.
I'd like to pipe in and just say, I think when you're looking at companies and you're looking at businesses and you're talking to the folks that might be interviewing at these companies, we've all talked about change. We've all talked about today how we've reacted to a crisis. We've talked about what's happened in the mall business, data center growth. It's all about being able to really think and out of the box a little bit. I know it's an old saying, but look for a company that's really trying to innovate and trying to be ahead of the curve to the extent that they can be in the business. You know, we're trying to help Marriott initiate certain new things in the check-in process and combine some F&B and check-in, you know, procedures and change the business model way ahead of really, I think, where the industry would find itself just in its own slow, dumb way. So, you know, I think look for innovation and look for the ability to really get ahead that way.
Awesome. Well, we're unfortunately out of time. I definitely appreciate this conversation with each of you. Appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And definitely tune in tomorrow on Research Day. We've got a lot of interesting new topics we're exploring in this inaugural process. I look forward to carrying on this conversation at another time with each of you. Thank you, everybody.